Mark Allen is recognized as one of triathlon's all-time greats, having captured 6 Ironman World Championship titles between 1989 and 1995. His final victory came at age 37, when he was the oldest champion in the event's history. Allen also excelled at Olympic distance racing, winning the first ever ITU World Championship in 1989, while also winning the Nice Triathlon 10 times. Between 1988 and 1990, Allen put together a winning streak of 20 consecutive first-place finishes. Over the course of his competitive career, which ended in 1996, Allen earned a podium finish in 90% of his races. He was named Triathlete of the Year 6 times by Triathlete magazine, and in 1997, Outside magazine, and I remember this, tabbed him the world's fittest man. He currently coaches athletes in over 50 countries through markallenonline.com and is an award-winning author for the book he co-authored with Brent Secunda titled Fit Soul, Fit Body, 9 Keys to a Healthier, Happier You. Please welcome Mark Allen.
Thank you. Well, this truly is an honor. There's a lot of people that I have not seen for many years. You all have many more wrinkles than last time I saw all of you, as I do. And I was wondering about the hair, too. I'm glad you asked the question. But the inductees this year, it's truly an amazing class. Myself, Scott Tinley, and Scott Molina, we had some incredible years together, and a lot of people have commented on the inspiration that we provided them, but I am especially honored to be inducted with Sally Edwards, because I think a lot of what we did were inspiring people in the sport who already had a foothold in what they were doing. They were doing some racing, and they would come up and say, I saw you winning this race or that race, and it really inspired me to be my best and to do even better at Ironman. Well, those people were already on the way. Sally's out there. She's taking people that don't even know if they can swim or they can bike or they can run. And she's plugging that battery pack into their life and getting them moving and getting them out there. So, Sally, congratulations, and it's a true honor to be inducted with you this year. We got being inducted this year, I don't know how it was in past years, but it was kind of a good news, bad news thing, because I got a call and an email saying that I was inducted, which I was extremely honored to hear about. But then about a week later, they gave me a task. They said, we need to put together a little media presentation, and we need a bunch of slides, and we need you to pick a song to go with it. And I'm thinking, oh, geez, it's got to represent everything that I'm about. And so I'm flipping through my iTunes library, and Led Zeppelin, no, Eric Clapton, doesn't cut it, Stephen Stills, Mavis Staples. I couldn't come up with it, and then finally the song popped out, and it was sung by at least 400-pound Hawaiian singer Izzy, certainly not a triathlete, but that song really holds or embodies everything that was important to me and that came out of the sport for me. He's from Hawaii, and certainly the Ironman and the experiences that I had there were some of the most impactful in my life. They were not all easy. Certainly many of them were very challenging, but they were precious and priceless. He was from Hawaii. He's playing an instrument called the ukulele, and that instrument was actually brought to the Hawaiians by their Mexican cousins. The people from Mexico came over about several hundred years ago with a little guitar that became the ukulele, and that little guitar is played today by the Huichol Indians in their sacred ceremonies in Mexico. And it's my studies with Brent Secunda, who teaches the Huichol tradition, that got me in the place where I was able to actually win a lot of those races that you saw up there on the slides. And in that song, he's saying, who am I? And I think that was a formative question that all of us were slowly beginning to understand through our experiences in the sport. Like Sally said, connecting her whole being together through this thing called triathlon. And I think each of us, Dave, Scott, and myself, we started the sport really just because it did sound crazy and it did sound intriguing and it was a physical puzzle that we were all trying to figure out. But through that process, we were really beginning to understand, who am I? And the first experience that I ever had in this was in June of 1982. It was at the USTS Triathlon Series opening event in San Diego at Torrey Pines Beach. I was 24 years old, and I finished that race in 4th place. But outside of an amazingly high finish for my first triathlon, which I thought, I was surprised actually. I don't know about you guys, but anyway, what was really significant about it was that in 1st place was Dave Scott, who had unsuccessfully not defended his Ironman title in February of that year, and he was coming back at that race, making an announcement that in October, when that race was going to happen again, there was no way anybody else in the world was going to be able to beat him, and he ran through that race like he was part human, part Titan. I mean, this guy just looked like he was in another world and absolutely, completely untouchable. 2nd place in that race, sprinting for it and winning it, was Scott Molina, who out-sprinted Scott Tinley in the final moments of that event. And in that sprint, Scott Molina had that look on his face that just said, all right, you want to go fast? I'm going to go a little bit faster. You want to train hard? I'm going to train a little bit harder. You want to go long? Well, let's go a little bit longer. And I think it served notice that he would become the most dominant short-distance triathlete in the 80s and early 90s. He was almost unbeatable in any short-distance event. 3rd place was Scott Tinley, who was the reigning Ironman champion from February of that year. He had set a world's record in that first of his 2 victories. 3rd place, he was ST. What else did he have to do? He was blonde. He was from Southern California. What more did the guy have to do? And then I was in 4th place, and as Dave said, we became known as the Big Four. And so this award for me really is not so much honoring the accomplishments that I did during my racing career, but really the sum of all of our accomplishments together. Because really, if any one of us were in the races, if we were all in a race together, it was about a 99% chance that one of us would be the champion. And when one of us won, it was a win for all of us. And each of us certainly has very distinct personalities, but because of that, I think it also served to help people identify with the athletes in this sport in a decade where we were fairly dominant. And it was just a priceless period, and I feel very honored to be a part of that. So on behalf of all of those guys, I'm accepting this award tonight. ST got a new haircut for tonight. He's going to actually invoice USAT for the cut. So, I think $150 or something. He'll tag on for the beer too. It wasn't easy. I will say it was not easy. This sport is and can be extremely hard, and it's in that challenge though that we find ourselves and we find our strengths. But sometimes we need others to help us to find that strength. And there were some people that I wanted to honor because they truly did help me to become the athlete and the person that I did through this sport. And instead of bringing up a cheat sheet, I just invited them to all come here so I could look over and make sure I don't forget anybody. One is my mother, Sharon Allen. Without her, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be anywhere without her. She was at every one of my Ironman races, and in the first 6 attempts, as many of you know, I didn't win. And in fact, I had some events and finishes where it was actually fairly devastating. And I would cross the finish line, and even when you win at Ironman, you kind of look like you're in pretty bad shape. Well, when you don't win and you think you can, you look really crappy. And you're hobbling along and go back to the condo, and mothers have that maternal instinct where they want to take care of their children and their offspring. And so she would come up and she'd go, "Do you think this sport's good for you?" And I would say, yeah, of course it is. And 1987 was the hardest time to say that because that year I ended up in the hospital with internal bleeding. And so, she's at my bedside and I'm bleeding, wondering how this is going to stop. And she's asking me, do you think this sport's good for you? And I bullshitted her and I said, oh yeah, it's great. Do you have a cork? It was really bad. But she said, you know yourself. If it's important, keep going. And so it was that support that got me back in 1989 to have the race that Dave and I did, which I'll talk about in a moment. So thank you, Mom. Charlie Graves is here from Park City, Utah. He was my business manager back in the day, and he negotiated a lot of financial dealings. It just enabled me to have the space to really put my efforts into trying to become the best person and the best athlete that I could. And he's sitting next to Keith Peters, who worked for Nike for many years and started working for me or on my behalf and in championing my cause within Nike. And the two of them actually had the toughest job in the world because on race morning in Hawaii, I stayed at a condo that was about 6 miles from the swim start, and they had the job of taking me to the swim start. And so the two of them would sit in the front seat, and I would sit in the back seat, and one time they tried to talk to me. And I gave them the icy grip stare, and both of them froze and slowly turned around, and never after that did they ever look in the back seat. Never once did they ask me, how you doing? How you feeling? You gonna win today? Because they knew the best they would get would be a grunt. And it was very, very, very stressful for them. But for me, it was the most peaceful 6 miles that I could ever have because I had someone driving me and a sentinel on the other side, and both of them are such great friends that I could just feel the depth of the support that they had for me, and I knew that no matter what happened, by the end of that day, that they would still be there for me. So thank you, both of you. Keith and Charlie. Mike Rubano is also here. He's a close friend. I met him in 1982. He is a massage therapist, and Mike probably knew me better than anybody during that period, and he helped to smooth out the rough edges of my life. Like everybody, I had a lot of challenges both in my racing and, some days things just aren't going the way you hope, but I knew that I could get on that massage table, and an hour later when I got off, everything would be perfect and in place. And without Mike's support and energy, I don't think I would have retired the sport healthy with everything moving like it still does. So thank you, Mike. There's somebody else here that in his own way, he probably does not know how he helped me, but it's my son, Matt. He's 18 now. He was born about a month after my 5th Ironman title in 1993. 1994, so he wasn't there. Well, he was there, but he wasn't out. He was kind of hiding. So in 1994, I did not race the Ironman, and so there was one reason, or there were two reasons, but one of the big reasons that I wanted to come back to Hawaii in 1995 was that I wanted Matt's to just be around that racing energy where I was out there, I was doing the best thing that I could do and putting out the best that I could so that he could, he was about 2 years old, he may not remember, but at least he would hopefully be able to just absorb the immensity and the intensity and the triumph of that day. And of course in my brain I'm thinking I'm going to go there and win on his behalf, but when I came off the bike I was 13 and a half minutes behind a 24-year-old German soldier named Thomas Hellriegel, and that wasn't so good. Nobody had made up 13 and a half minutes to come back to win the title there, and so when I got off the bike, I was just trying to keep as much positive energy going as I could, and when I got to the top of the first hill on the run course, You know how it is when you're out there and you're just trying to pull in as much positive energy as you can from the crowd. And when I got to the top of the first hill, there were 3 old ladies who were up there, and they were staring and cheering at me, and they're going, "Go Mark, go Mark, go Mark. Ah, he doesn't look so good." And that thought sunk in, and about a mile later, I felt so bad that I didn't think I was even going to be able to finish the race. And then, your mind's going crazy with all that kind of stuff that doesn't help you out. Oh, hell, Regal, he's so far ahead. I can't win this thing. There's the hotel just... And then Matt's popped into my mind, and I thought, you know what? Part of the reason I'm here is to honor him with my effort. And quitting is not an effort that I would be proud of. Certainly if I'd hurt myself, that would be one thing, but I just don't feel good. Well, who cares if you don't feel good? You're still in this race. And I took another step, and eventually I realized somehow I'm going to get to that finish line, and somehow he will be part of that energy. And then, as you know, things began to turn around, and eventually I passed Thomas Hellriegel for the victory at mile 23 of the marathon. And Matt's was there, and there's a video from NBC, and I cross the line, and I see him, and I give him a kiss and kind of rub him on his belly, and I've asked him, "Do you remember that?" He goes, yeah, well, I don't know if I remember it, if it's just I've seen that video so many times that... There's one other person that could not make it tonight because he had a prior commitment, but he had an incredible impact on my ability to be a great triathlete and to put the performances out that I did. His name is Brant Secunda, and I met him, made a connection with him prior to the 1989 race, and that was one of the reasons why I was able to stay stable under the pressure of racing against an incredible athlete named Dave Scott, who is as solid as anybody ever gets out there on the race course. Everybody else in the sport, when push comes to shove and you're racing head to head, when you get to the marathon, especially in an Ironman, at that point in my career, I kind of had this ability to kind of sense when somebody was feeling weak, and then I could push in a little surge and drop them. Well, Dave, that wasn't going to happen. And I had to find that ability to stay quiet and calm. And Brant was able to help me to do that throughout the second half of my career. And he is a shaman from the Huichol Indian tradition in Mexico. And you might ask yourself, what the heck does a shaman have to do with a triathlete? Well, let me ask you a question. What happens to you when the gun goes off and your race starts to fall apart and all of a sudden it doesn't look anything like your pre-race visualization? Where do you go to find the strength to keep going? Where do you go when you're in a race and you want to quit because that's so much easier? How do you find that place of strength that says it's worth it to keep going? Where do you go to find that place within yourself that says it really doesn't matter how I do out here. I'm just going to give it everything I have, even if that means that I will walk the rest of this marathon or come in last. Where do you find those places? How do you develop them? And that's what Brant helped me to do. So even though he's not here, I'd like to honor him for all the help that he gave me throughout that career to develop that inner strength of character that did indeed carry me to many great victories. We've all had great moments in this sport. Otherwise, we wouldn't be sitting here tonight. You know, because of this sport, I was able to cross finish lines in Japan and Australia, in Europe, in England. I was able to cross finish lines because of this sport in Chile, and Guatemala, and Brazil. Amazing. Because of this sport, I was able to go to the 1989 ITU World Championships in Avignon, France, the first ever the inaugural World Championships that would eventually become the first major stepping stone for getting this sport in the Olympics. And I was able to win that race. And as I was standing on the podium with Glenn Cook from England on one side and Rick Wells from New Zealand on the other side, our three flags were raised, and the American flag was just a little bit higher than the others. And in that moment, I was proud to look up at that flag. Not so much because it meant that I was an American, but more because it meant that I was from a country that a sport this amazing had the ability to be born that could bring the world together in celebration of human performance. Because of this sport, I met Scott Molina. And because I met Scott Molina, he was somebody who met a woman named Erin Baker, who's from New Zealand. And because of that, they trained down in New Zealand. And because of that, I went down to New Zealand in 1989 and trained for 6 weeks and started to put together the type of training that would help me to become the Ironman champion. Thank you, Scott. And because of this sport, I met Scott Tinley, somebody who was always showing me that this sport is not going to last forever, and you got to get your shit together, because someday those free shoes and those free goggles are not going to keep coming. You're going to have to rely on what you're doing today, not what you did last week in the race, to survive and to thrive. Thank you, Scott. You prepared me. And because of Dave Scott, I was mentored along. He didn't know it, but in those early Ironman races where he pulled away, he was teaching me what it takes to be great. He was teaching me how to have confidence. He was teaching me how to raise the bar and then raise it a little bit higher. And because of that, I had that amazing race with him in 1989, where both of us pushed the bar to the point where suddenly the world realized that you cannot just only survive an Ironman, you can race it all the way to that finish line. So thank you, everybody, for all of that inspiration. I hope that each of you has a great evening tonight. Congratulations to all the other inductees, and thank you very much.